We continue now at the top of Daf Ayin Hey Amud Aleph and Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 75a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing niguv, which is cleansing a wine press. Sometimes you cleanse the wine press in order to make it kosher. And there was machlokus, what exactly is niguv? Rav said that niguv is b'mayim, with water. And Rav Bar Chana said that it's with afer, it's with ashes. And the Gemara in the previous Amud found it unreasonable to say that Rav was saying only with water, and that Rav Bar Chana was saying only with ashes. And so therefore the Gemara now says, Rav Amar b'mayim v'hu adin la'efer. Rav is saying with water, but the same is with regards to ashes. We'll see Rashi in a moment how he interprets that. And Rav Bar Chana, Amar Rav Bar Chana says, be'efer, it means with afer, with ashes, v'hu adin l'mayim, and the same is true with water. V'lo pligi, and they're actually not arguing. Habiretifta, habiyabeshta. In one case, we're talking about a wine press which is moist. In one case, we're talking when it is dry. And Rashi explains, Rav Amar Mayim Tchila. Rav says that first you do the water, V'hu hadin shetzarech efer achareim, and then you need to have the ashes afterward. In other words, V'hu hadin doesn't mean the same would be true with regards to efer. It is saying the order of how you're supposed to cleanse. First you use water, then you use efer, according to Rav. V'Rav Bar Chana Amar be'efer Tchila. Rav Bar Chana says first you use efer, V'hu hadin shetzarech mayim achareim, and then you need to use water after. And then the Gemara said they're not actually arguing. It just depends on the wine press. B'retifta, if you have a damp wine press, sheyesh ba lachluchas yain, there's some wine still over there. So then, no sein efer tchila l'shafshe. First, you have to put the efer ad shetei neguv, in order you rub the efer there to make it dry. V'yachar kach mayim, and then you put on the water. But b'yabeshta, but if it's a dry wine press, then mayim tchila, then you put the water on first. V'yachar kach efer, and then you put on the ashes umashafshef, and you cleanse. And the Gemara continues, Itmar, it was stated, Bei Rav Mishmei de Rav Amri, the students of Rav and the yeshiva of Rav, they said in the name of Rav, Tarti Tlos, that it's 2-3, the procedure of cleansing. We'll see Rashi in a moment. Ushmuel Amar Tlos Dalit, and Shmuel says the procedure is 3-4. Besura Masnu Hachi, now in Surah, that's the way they learned the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. Again, Rav says 2-3, and Shmuel says 3-4. But Pumbedisa Masnu, but in Pumbedisa they teach it as follows. Bei Rav Amri Mishmei de Rav Tlos Dalit, that in the yeshiva of Rav, they say in the name of Rav that it's 3-4. Ushmuel Amar Dalit Hey, and Shmuel says that it's 4-5. And the Gemara continues and says, V'lo pligi, they are not arguing. We'll see Rashi on this as well. Mar kachashav and maya basroi, one is counting the last rinse, the last water. Umar lo kachashav maya basroi, and the other one is not counting that last rinse. And Rashi explains, Tarti Tlos 2-3, that's in the Surah version of the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. And Rav says that it's 2-3, meaning, B'retifta, meaning if you have a wet wine press, Tarti, it's a two-step process. Efer umayim, you do ashes and water. The idea is that the ashes dry it off, and then you apply the rinse, you apply the water. B'yabeshta, if it is a dry wine press, Tlos mayim ve'efer umayim, then it's a three-step process. First you apply water, then ashes, and then water again. And then Tlos v'dalad, then you have Shmuel's opinion within the Surah version, which is 3-4, and that means to say again, Tlos b'retifta, it's a three-step process when it is a wet wine press, and that is efer umayim ve'efer, that's ashes and water and ashes. V'afal pisha choser v'nosen mayim lahavir ha'efer. Now, even though, according to Shmuel, you actually are going to again apply water in order to take away those ashes, hanu mayim lo kachashiv. Shmuel is not counting that water, delav l'shum negiva, because that's not for the purpose of drying and cleansing, koso min ha'efer, rather, that's for the purpose of just removing the efer, removing the ashes. V'dalid b'yabeshta, and then again, according to this version of Shmuel, it's a four-step process by a dry wine press, mayim efer umayim ve'efer, it's going to be water, ashes, water, and ashes, umayim basroi lo chashiv, and again, that last rinse, which is to take away the efer, that we are not counting. Rav lo boy efer elachada zimna, and the point over here is that Rav requires efer just one time, u'Shmuel boy efer trei zimne, and Shmuel requires efer 2 times. Bein b'retifta, bein b'yabeshta. Whether we're talking about a wet wine press or a dry wine press, that really is the root of the machlokas between Rav and Shmuel, whether efer is required once or efer is required twice. And Rashi continues, but Pumbedisa masnu l'Rav tlos v'dalit. In Pumbedisa, they said that Rav held 3 and 4. Kiddufarisha says, I just explained above, meaning what was just explained according to Shmuel is Rav's opinion in Pumbedisa, meaning that you have to have efer twice. V'l'Shmuel dalit b'retifta v'hebi abesh, and according to Shmuel, it's a 4-step process by a wet wine press and a 5-step process by a dry one, to kachashev maya basroi, because in this version, Shmuel is just counting that last rinse, and so essentially, v'lo pligi, they're not really arguing. Rav Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel are not really arguing Lahai Lishna de Pumbedisa according to the version of Pumbedisa. Ela Rav lo chashiv Maya Basroi. It's just that Rav is not counting the last rinse. So Shmuel chashiv Maya Basroi, and Shmuel is counting that last rinse. And Rashi continues with another explanation of the Gemara. V'istim afarshi, there are those that explain velo pligi, that when we say velo pligi, that they're not arguing, that's actually hani lishni de sura de pumbedisa. It means the two versions, the version of surah and the version of pumbedisa, are not arguing. Again, according to Rashi's first explanation, within pumbedisa, Rav and Shmuel are not arguing. But here we're saying that the versions of surah and pumbedisa are not arguing. Ela de surah lo chashvi maya basra. It's just that in surah they didn't count the last rinse. With the pumbedisa chashvi lo, and pumbedisa counted the last rinse. Aval Rav Shmuel pligi, and according to this understanding, Rav and Shmuel are arguing in both versions. V'hachi perusha, according to this istim afarshi, he would explain as follows: De milsa tarti tlos. When we're saying that it's 2-3, tarti biabeshta, it's a two-step process by a dry wine press. That's mayim of afer, that's water and ashes. And tlos, what does it mean? A three-step process, beritifta. That's if it's a wet wine press. Afer umayim of afer, it's going to be ashes, water and ashes. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, tlos beritifta kidaka amrit, by a wet wine press, so it's going to be 3, just like you said. Aval biabeshta, but when it comes to a dry wine press, dalit, it's actually going to be a four-step process. Mayim of mayim ve'efer, it's going to be water, ashes, water, ashes. Tivakulu bo'in on efer trezimni, because we always require efer 2 times. Uve pumbedisa, and in pumbedisa, masnu l'Rav, the way they teach what Rav said was tlos v'dalit, was a 3 and 4 step process, meaning biabeshta, if it's a dry wine press, tlos, it is a 3-step process. Mayim ve'efer mayim, it's going to be water, ashes, and water. V'hainu nami kidesura, and that's really the same as what Surah's version of Rav was. Ela dahani kachashri maya basra, it's just that over here, you're counting that last water, which is rinsing off the ashes. Uveretifta, and then again in pumbedisa's version, when it's a wet wine press, dalit, it's a 4-step process. Efer umayim, it's going to be ashes, water, ashes, water. V'la Shmuel b'retifta dalit kedaka amrit, and then according to Shmuel, when it's a wet wine press, it's going to be 4, just like you said. Avol biabeshta, but by a dry wine press, so then hey, it's actually going to be a 5-step process. Mayim ve'efer, it's going to be water and ashes. Umayim ve'efer, and water and ashes. Umayim, and then a last rinsing of water. V'yabeshta nami boy trezim ne'efer, because by a dry wine press as well, you're going to need to have 2 times ashes. Velo pligi, and they're not really arguing hanach de surah u'de pumbedisa. The versions of surah and pumbedisa are not really arguing, meaning to say they're not arguing because the question just is, are you counting that last rinsing with water? Aval Rav Shmuel pligi biabeshta bein b'desura bein b'depumbedisa. But Rav and Shmuel are arguing by a dry wine press, whether in surah or whether in pumbedisa. The Rav lo boy bo efer elachad zimna, because Rav only requires 1 application of ashes. Ushmuel boy trey, and Shmuel requires 2. Trey zimni, he requires 2 times applying the ashes. And Rashi says lashon abamori. This understanding, the second istim afarshi, is what my father explained. Menuchaso kavod v'hunira be'enai. And Rashi says this appears to me to be the correct understanding. And Rashi continues, V'harishon lashon mori, the first explanation is the understanding of my Rebbe, v'kashali begava, but Rashi says I have a difficulty with that. Because michti let us see, l'lishna de surah, according to the version of surah, Rav Shmuel miflag pligi, Rav and Shmuel are arguing in the version of surah. So ma'ishna v'derav chashamaya basrai, why is it that according to Rav we count the last rinsing, u'v'deshmuel lo chashamaya basrai, and according to Shmuel we're not counting the last rinsing. L'shmuel dalid v'hei boy leila misni, it should have said according to Shmuel 4 and 5 in that version of surah. B'shalom pumbedisa. Now I understand according to pumbedisa, afagav v'derav lo chashvi, even though by Rav we're not counting it, uv'deshmuel chashvi, and by Shmuel we are counting it. Nicha, there it makes sense. Mishum depluksayu derav Shmuel lesa ella b'mechashev maya basrai, because there the entire machlokas between Rav and Shmuel is whether we count the last rinsing. Ela lishna de surah, the sof pligi, but according to surah where they're arguing anyhow, kashali, that is still difficult to me. And the Gemara continues, Bo minei me Rabbi Avo, they asked Rabbi Avo the following question, Hani gurgi da'aramoy, these wicker nets that belong to the Gentiles, according to Rashi, the wicker nets would hold the grapes in place while they were treading upon the grapes. So what's the halach in terms of how you cleanse those, that we can be able to use those? Amar lehu Rabbi Avo said to them, Tanisu, we learned the answer to that question in the following brisa. Haresha Yugitav ubeis badav tamein, if his wine presses or his olive presses were tamein, they were impure. Uvikesh la'asos and betar, and he wants to make them pure. Hadapin, the planks, va'adoshin, and the troughs, v'halulavin, and the twigs that are used for brooms. Madichan, he rinses those. V'ho'akolin, and the baskets, shel nitzarin, if they're made of palm leaves, v'shel bitzputz, or if they're made of hemp, menagvan, he cleanses those. V'shel shifa, v'shel gami, if they're made of bulrush or reeds, miyashnon yud beis chodesh, he lets them stay dormant for 12 months. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, manichon migas legas, umibad lebad. He lets them stay dormant from one wine press to the next wine press the next season, or from one olive press to the next olive press again. You wait till the next season. And the Gemara interrupts and asks, Hainu Tanakama, isn't this exactly the same as the Tanakama? That's 12 months. And the Gemara answers, Ika beinayu, the difference between them is chorfe v'afle. Sometimes you have late ripening grapes, and sometimes you have early ripening grapes, so it might not be exactly 12 months. And the Brisa continues, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Harotza l'taron miyad, if somebody wants to purify them immediately, you don't want to wait 12 months to purify the olive press or the wine press, magilon baroschin, so then you can use boiling hot water, o cholton, you can scald them b'meizesim, with the water that's used to cook olives. And the Brisa continues, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Mishum Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel in the name of Rabbi Yossi says, Manichon tachas tzinor, you can place them underneath a pipe, Shemeimav mekalchin, from which the water flows constantly, O b'mayin, or by a spring, Shemeimav rodfin, which has rapid waters, V'kamen, how long do you have to leave them there for? Ona, for a time period, which the Gemara will explain. And then the Brisa says, Kederech she'amru b'yei nesach, just like we say by yayin nesach, kach amru b'taharo, so too you use the same method when purifying it from impurity. The Gemara says, Klap Elaya, what is this last line? Which direction is this last line of the Brisa going? B'taharos kaimin, and this whole Brisa is talking about purification. It's not talking about yayin nesach. So what do you mean? The way we say by yayin nesach, that's what we say by taharos. And so the Gemara reverses it. Ella, rather, what the Brisa means to say is, Kederech she'amru b'taharos, the same that we say by taharos. By purification, kach amru b'yayin nesach, that's the same method in terms of yayin nesach. And the Gemara says, Kama ona, how long is this period of an ona? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Rabbi Chia bar Abba says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the Rabbi Yochanan says, O yom, O laila, it's either a day or a night. Rabbi Chana She'ina says, V'amri lo, and some have the version, Rabbi Chana bar She'ina, that Rabbi Chana, the son of She'ina, says, Amar Rabba bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabba bar Chana says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, Chatzi yom v'chatzi laila, an ona is a half a day and a half a night. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak says, V'lo pligi, they're not actually arguing. The one that says that it's a day or a night, and the one that says a half a day or a half a night, they're not really arguing. Habit kufas Nisan v'Tishrei, in one case we're talking in the season of Nisan and Tishrei. In the season of Nisan and Tishrei, the days and the nights are equal length. They're 12 hours, so it's a day or a night. It's essentially a way of saying 12 hours, you leave it over there. And Habit kufas Tammuz v'Teves, and then when we're saying a half a day and a half a night, that would be in seasons like Tammuz and Teves, in the summer and the winter seasons, where you have the day and night are not the same. In the summer, the day is longer and the night is shorter. In the winter, the day is shorter and the night is longer. So there, if you do a half a day and a half a night, it's going to equal the same 12 hours. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Hani revaki da'aramoy, these straining bags that belong to the Gentiles, they're used to strain the yeast from the wine. Dimazi, if they're made of hair, madichon, they could just be rinsed. Diamr, if they're made of wool, so those absorb more. So menagvan, you have to cleanse those. And dekisn, if they're made of flax, miyashnon, you have to leave those dormant. And the Gemara says, V'ika kitre, now if there are knots in them, shari luhu, you have to untie those knots. And the Gemara continues, Hani dekule v'chalosa da'aramoy, the baskets and the strainers that belong to Gentiles. Dechaiti b'chavle detzure, if they are plated with palm strips madichon, then you rinse them. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Hey Amid Beis.